this shift, and also explore cooperation opportunities between international and national bodies, as well as the private sector. Now, we're hoping that the discussion this morning with our panelists will be about 40 to 45 minutes, so that we can allow time to open the floor up to participants for a question and answer session. So please do send through your questions on the chat section so that we can pick those up. We may not have time to respond to all questions, but we will make our best efforts to select the most representative questions. And now, without any further ado, let me introduce you to our incredible panel who are joining us this morning. So we have Olga Skryecka-Elina, who's the work area lead for skills strategies for future labour markets from the International Labour Organization. We also have Tehene Tezera, who's the Director of Department of Agribusiness at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Then we have James Gomez, who's the Director of People and Society from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Also joining us is Deb Geyer, who's the Vice President of Environment, Health and Safety and Corporate Social Responsibility from Stanley Black & Decker. And also Louis Shengjiang, who's Professor of Shanghai University of Engineering Science in China. And of course, we also have a youth representative. We have with us Li Hee-dong, who's the WorldSkills Champion Trust regional representative for Asia. And it's fantastic that we've got Li Hee-dong with us this morning. And so he is going to start with some introductory remarks from the youth perspective. So over to you, Li Hee-dong.
Thanks, Neil. 2 years ago, I was attending a session about the definition of green skills at the WorldSkills 2019 conference in Kazan. Let me tell you a quick review. According to UNIDO, green skills are the knowledge, abilities, values, and attitudes needed to live in, develop, and support a sustainable and resource-efficient society. In that session, I realized that my skill, CNC machining, is also one of green skills. Ever since that, in my daily work as a CNC machining engineer at Samsung, I have put a lot of effort to make my skill as green as it can be. Actually, CNC milling plays a critical role in making stronger products that people can use for a long time. As we all know, durability is a key characteristic of sustainability. My generation needs to lead the way in taking individual responsibility for making the world greener and urge the industry to do the same. Young people want to contribute to a greener economy, find fulfillment working for companies whose green values align with our own. Every skill and job needs to have sustainability embedded into its education. Each of us is responsible for caring for our planet. Every person, every business, every government need to make this their priority. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lee. And it's absolutely fantastic to have that perspective from you as a former competitor and a member of the WorldSkills Champions Trust to open up and set the challenge. I think that the next generation is setting policymakers and businesses and global organizations really to pick up the challenge of greening our economy. And the first theme that I wanted to really discuss this morning with everybody is the impact of COVID-19 on the greening of the economy and green skills, and really thinking about the link that can be made between COVID and climate change and the impact that this has had on green skills development. And I'd like to move first to Olga from the ILO, and just to inquire really from ILO's projections and assessments, how has the pandemic really affected the greening of jobs? Has it been going forwards or backwards? What is the ILO perspective?
Everybody, and thank you very much for the question, Neil. Induced economic crisis affected green jobs per se. We know that the COVID disruptor on the labor market of all types of jobs, including green jobs. Also the awareness of the side of the international community and governments of counter climate change measures and resilience in the society and in the economy and business. Overall number of job opportunities, whether green or non-green, decreased. Even they were enjoying steady growth before the COVID, green jobs experienced losses in working hours. And that translated also in losses in numbers of jobs. So we know in 2020 alone, around 9% of global working hours were lost, and that translated incredible 2,255. And of course, we know that some sectors were affected more than others, particularly wholesale and retail, accommodation and food services, manufacturing. So if green jobs or greening jobs were situated in these sectors, they were also affected some jobs in other men, especially young women, youth in general, and also lower skilled people. However, we know from our rapid assessments of reskilling and upskilling needs that the hiring intentions on the side of employers when it comes to green jobs are rather positive. We also know global green recovery assessment implemented with our research partners that green recovery scenario within green transport would add more than by 2030, and it is many, many more million jobs compared to similarly target the green transition. We need a multi-stakeholder approach, we need good policies, and we need green recovery. So that's why the UN Secretary General called on support taxpayers' money is to create green jobs of growth rather than bailing out an intensive industry. And with this hope, and also with the launch of the UN Climate Change Action for Jobs initiative spearheaded by the ILO, with the IMF also conditioning its financial support to invest emergency loans in green sectors, with the EU Green Deal program reinvigorated as the response to the COVID-19 crisis, with the African Union Commission supporting also renewed, and also knowing that among the OECD partner countries and the OECD countries themselves, around 30 governments, including the green response at the jobs response crisis, COVID crisis agenda. But we know skilling and upskilling measures at the heart of response strategies, because if skills are there, these stimulus packages will not be implemented. And that's why the ILO, in its call for action for human-centered recovery this year, calls for the inclusive, sustainable, resilient response, and lifelong learning are very much at the heart of the recovery.
Olga, sorry to interrupt. The sound isn't coming across on all of your answers, so I was wondering if perhaps, unfortunately, if you could turn off your camera, then we might get better quality to hear your answer. Yes, so let's see if that works. Sorry for interrupting you.
Because I if you can tell me what was the last point, I can repeat perhaps some.
Yes, you were talking about international cooperation and the UN strategic goals. Yeah,
so with the global awareness and all measures which are put in the heart of the program and policies at international level as well as among countries that are indeed good, but also to think about reskilling and upskilling measures as part of those strategies, because otherwise the stimuli packages will not be able to have to be realized. And that's why also the ILO from the COVID-19 crisis, where now inclusive, sustainable, and resilient response is developed around capabilities and agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. And that's given us a real, I think, good insight into some of the data and the experience from an ILO perspective. But moving across to UNIDO and Hene Tezera, I was just wondering if you could give us some thoughts on the effects of the pandemic from the transition towards a low-carbon, greener economy, and where UNIDO's green skills development projects are carried out. Has there been any disruption due to lockdowns and restrictions? So over to you, Hene.
Thank you, Neil. As we all know, at the beginning of the crisis, the immediate priority for governments has been saving lives. The following action has been to quickly adapt support policies that minimize destruction of jobs, incomes, value chains, and productive capacities. Governments have now started to roll out policies to kickstart the economy, and green recovery measures are part of the COVID-19 recovery programs, even though it is on a smaller scale. On the other hand, we have seen how the pandemic has severely disrupted global value chains, both on the supply and demand side, which has encouraged enterprises to adopt new technologies and upgrade their business models and invest in shorter, really local and regional resilient value chains to reduce supply chain risks and add value to local products. The pandemic has also accelerated the debate around sustainability, circularity, efficient resource management, and the necessity to create sustainable, circular, innovative business models if the business wants to become more resilient in this new normal. The shift to the green economy will also require a skilled force. This will include skills in low carbon environmental goods and services industry, sustainable agriculture and manufacturing, renewable energy, biodiversity preservation, and sustainable forestry, waste and water management, and so on. There is a huge opportunity to focus on skills training and on innovation in green technologies. This will, of course, can drive the green job creation. During the pandemic, UNIDO had to adapt a new approach in its day-to-day project implementation very, very quickly. As an example, in Morocco, H2O Maghreb project focusing on TVET in water and wastewater management had to quickly find a viable solution to keep the students and trainers engaged and avoid any unnecessary disruption in the training delivery. The project switched to a training program to a virtual modality by offering trainers and trainees unlimited access to an online e-learning platform with courses, video sessions, and virtual aquatronic simulations. This is how in UNIDO we have continued with most of our projects during the lockdown and the restrictions. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating insight into the work you're doing, but also how you have managed to move around the disruptions that have been caused. And perhaps before we go to hear from the business sector and the representatives on the panel, I would like to maybe get a focus on a perspective from China. So I've got a question now for Liu Shengzhang, who's professor at Shanghai University of Engineering Science. I just wanted to ask you, Liu, how did the pandemic affect greening efforts at the national level, do you think, in China? And what has the Chinese government been doing to move forward on the green economy agenda?
Okay, thank you, Leo. I want to share my understanding from three different aspects.
You need to unmute.
Mute? Oh, sorry. So can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Yeah. I want to share my understanding from three different aspects. First of all, China had witnessed an accelerated transition towards the greener economy during the last decades. One clear evidence is that just a few months before, our Chinese government have announced its ambitious commitment to strive to the carbon dioxide emission peak before 2030 and also achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. You can imagine various of measures would be taken to guarantee the fulfillment of this commitment. What we have already witnessed nowadays, just at present, is tightened regulations on the carbon dioxide emission and also the start of a national carbon market. The second, I want to say that the effect of COVID-19 and this green transition in the short run obviously is negative. And the firms with worse financial status would reduce their investment in green technology, and consumers with less income would choose not to buy the green but a little bit more expensive products. And also from the microeconomic perspective, a lot of governments, including Chinese government, are trying to stimulate the economy with investment expansion. Obviously, some of they tend to relax the green requirements of the investment to some extent. Yeah, and the third, from the in the long run, I can see the effect should be positive. Yeah, and the pandemic itself had reminded the whole human beings, the human society, the importance of green economy. Yeah, we have never realized so great, so important of the green economy. And a lot of industries, like green industries, emerged during this process because they are less resource dependent, they are more energy efficient, and also they are more environment friendly. They also gain more support from the government, from the public, and also from the consumers. On the other side of the coin, a lot of high resource dependent companies or high pollution companies are driven out of the industry. To conclude, thanks to the success fight against the pandemic in China, the process of the transition to a green economy is not slowed down. Yeah, and we have the confidence that we can fulfill the commitment. Yeah, thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic insight into how government policy and regulation is helping really shape the private sector investment, and looking at what you were saying about investment shifting demand, particularly in things like green industries and motor manufacturing, is having a real impact. And that's a good segue into I think contributions in the private sector, and thinking about how the private sector, how the pandemic has impacted their strategies and agenda. And I'll come first to James. James, from a general perspective, from your organisation, has the pandemic and the green recovery really brought opportunities for the private sector and for businesses?
Neil, thanks. Yes, so I think there's probably a few things to highlight in terms of what the pandemic has done to and for the private sector. Initially, I think in terms of mindset and awareness raising. So the pandemic certainly highlighted the impact of systemic shocks and how they have the potential to completely decimate business activity or cause real supply chain shock. And I think we've probably all seen the meme or the JPEG or whatever whatever it's called, that goes around on social media of the different waves of impacts. We've seen the COVID wave, but then that's followed by the bigger waves of climate change and then biodiversity loss. So I think it's raised awareness of these types of shocks, and it has provided a preview of other shocks that are in the pipeline, and then that's probably therefore spurred increased business action in terms of resilience and future preparation. I think the other thing the pandemic has highlighted for the business community is the interconnectivity of our global systems and indeed of our natural systems, highlighting the fact that we cannot consider ourselves in isolation of each other as countries, as sectors, as communities, and indeed we can't consider ourselves in isolation from the natural world as well. So another big mindset shift that I think is at play in the business community. And then it also has demonstrated the impact that can be generated positively from a global response to an issue like this, which is based on science. The global vaccine rollout, although still lacking in terms of its equity, has been a success story in many parts of the world, and demonstrating how, if we work bilaterally, if public and private sectors come together to tackle these sorts of challenges, then solutions can be possible. So I think that's a sort of a beacon of hope, and has provided an opportunity for us to think about how we do this in relation to the climate emergency. And then I think more generally, for individuals and companies and governments, the pandemic's provided a critical reflection point, a chance for us to maybe stop and think about how we want to rebuild, how we want to rebuild better or build back better, both for the private sector and for various governments around the world. And the stimuli packages from governments that are now paving the way for potentially historic levels of investment and growth have really captured the imagination and the entrepreneurism of global businesses around the world. I think it's important to recognize the fact, however, that not every company is going to benefit from these. It's only the companies that are embracing transformation, are embracing the need to go far beyond what's ever been where business has been before in these areas. It's not a case of business as usual. Businesses that carry on as usual will not be benefiting from these, and they will be the businesses that ultimately will fail to survive. So it's a transformative agenda that needs to be embraced. And then finally, I think it will be key to ensure that this growth is equitable and that everyone is empowered to benefit from it. So that's in this context important today that we're having this discussion around green skills. But I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, James. So lots of opportunity, but also challenges in terms of the impact that it's having on, as you said, business as usual, and how we adapt to this new normal. And so, which is a great way to move on to a question for Deb. From a large multinational company, what's your experience at Stanley Black & Decker been in terms of dealing with the past 18 months and adjusting to the new situation? And how has that really affected what you're trying to achieve in terms of your own greening strategy, Deb?
Great question, Neil. Thank you. And it's wonderful to be here with everyone today. And maybe to just set the ground on how I want to respond to that question, just by introduction, Stanley Black & Decker is global. We are multinational, and we are an industrial company. So when you think about our products of hand and power tools and security solutions and industrial fasteners, when the pandemic hit the world, our company was quickly identified as an essential business. So why is that important? Well, when the pandemic hit, homes quickly became the epicenters of daily life, right? Employees that were in offices were now virtual. And we saw an incredible uptick in our customers purchasing our tools to help renovate their homes now to become offices, to become classrooms, to become gyms, and more. And so our sales growth certainly took off with a reflection on what the consumers needed in order to make their way through this pandemic. So we definitely saw the pandemic positively for us as an opportunity versus a risk. And it helped us also to pivot. We knew that we could advance our products in ways that would help the health crisis, right? So we quickly adjusted our focus into healthcare solutions, trying to keep those same business rhythms, but really helping our frontline healthcare workers make it through this pandemic. So by that, I mean, for example, we would adjust from making our traditional power tools to expanding our battery technology to create things such as three-dimensional face shields. And our innovation exploded in terms of how we could help with mask technology. And who would have thought our fasteners and our batteries, together with companies in partnership with Ford and 3M, allowed us to make the critical respirators and ventilators out there to keep people alive through this pandemic. So yes, we did have an immediate move away from our green skills, but only temporarily because of the crisis. And we are moving quickly back in to do our part, a long-term committal to our climate change. And that focuses a lot on things such as sustainable packaging, the evolution of our tools to become electrified, and certainly more. So back to you, Neil.
Hey, thanks, Deb. That's a very frank, honest account of the, I guess, the challenges and opportunities you faced and how you were really, responding to market demand while contributing positively and beneficially, no doubt, to helping frontline workers and businesses, as you say, respond to the pandemic. And it does help lead into the next question, which is for Olga, from the ILO perspective, because I understand that the ILO and the World Bank and UNESCO have produced an interagency survey on the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the provision of TVET and skills development. So perhaps, Olga, you could tell us a little bit about the findings.
Thank you, Neil, for the question. And just for the sake, I will switch off my video.
Thank you.
UNESCO, in early days of the pandemic, April, May 2020. So that response measure by government and therefore vision of vocation education, training and skills development in general were also the most serious effect. So other sectors and other types of businesses, also 95% of training providers whom we asked around the world, they all either stopped the temporary provision of training, or they switched to online learning. So all learners became online or distant learners and teachers. What is worrying, however, is when we asked those training institutions, including apprenticeship training, 98 of them corruption. So imagine it's really almost 100%. And of course, poor countries worked and households that with poor income also were more affected. This has all happened due to the digital itself during the COVID-19, with lack of access to digital infrastructure, of connectivity. Learning was not possible. However, also these are those ones which were reported by a lot of innovation in the provision of learning, high tech, virtual reality, and now it would be important, of course, the mainstream vocation education and training. So this was comforting to know. Also, the job seekers, employees, and those people in employment now are more aware of skills in order to end the COVID-19 or find the job after once the world goes into the recovery after the crisis. Around a third of them mentioned investments into that claim of the need in green skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And I'm afraid we're still experiencing some sound difficulties, I think, due to bandwidth. But just to summarize for everybody, what Olga was saying was the survey really showed that there has been quite a bit of disruption due to complete or partial closures of training institutions in many, many countries. And according to the survey, 90% of respondents reported a complete closure of TVET centres in their countries in response to the spread of the pandemic. So overwhelming, I think, disruption in work-based learning due to the closure of enterprises and companies all across all regions of the world. So there's been quite, significant disruption there. Which leads me then back to UNIDO and to Hene and thinking about, from a UNIDO perspective, the disruptions that Olga has been highlighting. Have they been affecting students equally, do you think? What are the gaps that have been identified, and how should we think about addressing them in preparing for a green transition? Hene, over to you.
Thank you, Niels. I think, as I mentioned before, the pandemic has hit the skills development quite drastically, as the teaching and learning process was based on face-to-face trainings in most of the developing countries. These countries faced difficulties adapting to digital platforms and remote learning, partly due to the weak digital infrastructure. Also, the pandemic has affected all segments of society. The low-income and disadvantaged groups, such as underprivileged youth and women, were hit much harder than the other strata of the society, leading to the widening of the digital and green skills gap. At UNIDO, we recognize the interlinkages between the digitalization and the green industry development. We also realize that green skills need to be aligned with the competencies required for smart manufacturing processes, especially in small and medium industries. Our annual Learning and Knowledge Development Facility, what we call LKDF, that is Learning and Knowledge Development Facility, partners meeting every year to identify the gaps from different angles and agree on the possible solutions and plan together on how to address them. The same facility plays a vital role as a platform and a repository of best practices and knowledge dissemination mechanisms, including providing skills catalogs to project partners and beneficiaries, and working together with public-private development partnership, what we call PPDPs. The PPDP model we adopted is used to develop and scale up training centers that will keep young females and male students with a demand-driven future skills, including the green and digital skills. Closing the skills gap and anticipating the demand from a green angle is imperative, especially when we know that more than $11.5 trillion will be added to the global GDP by 2028. Here in UNIDO, we are constantly working with our partners in anticipation of skills in demand, including the skills required for the green transition, and then we continue to do that with our partners. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So that's a real, pointing to, a big challenge around skills gaps and skills mismatches. One of the biggest challenges worrying everyone, I think, governments, business, and the workforce. So, thinking about how we can address them, I think if I move back to China, and the next question for you, Sheng Zhang from Shanghai University of Engineering Science. Thinking about how is China addressing skills gaps and mismatches, And you particularly have an interesting perspective, not just because you have a national perspective, but also as a university in Shanghai. What are your thoughts on how China is addressing skills gaps and mismatches? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Yeah. First of all, we thought part of the skill or education gap is kind of lateral in the labor market. So because it takes time for the training institutions to adapt to respond to the industry needs. So a more efficient labor market with more efficient information exchange would, of course, help a lot. I think that's what our government is always focusing on investing in at the moment. The industry is keeps developing, keeps changing, keeps improving, and so should the skills. The skills, including the green skills, should always be improved constantly through maybe an iteration model. So which highlights the importance of the continuous learning and the lifelong learning. That's also another focus of our government. It invests so much money to build this kind of lifelong learning system. As far as I can understand, the skill gap or the education gap is determined by two main factors. The first is the passing of the industry needs to the training institutions, and the second is the prompt response of the training institutions in the training program design. For the first part. For the first part, we think the involvement of the leading companies into the training system is of vital importance. We have encouraged all the training institutions in China to build a close relationship with the local companies. And these days, we are even encouraging the listed companies and all the biggest state-owned enterprises to establish training institutions by themselves. For the second part, I think more inclusive and more flexible training methodology in training program design is very important. So our experience is that if a worker or people are equipped with a solid foundation or basic methodologies, and they are easy to adapt themselves into new skills, new job opportunities. So maybe the training institutions should focus more about the basics, the fundamentals, rather than to try to catch the newest skills in the industry. So that's my understanding. Yeah, thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much. And some very important message there, Leo, about business engagement, I think, with training, but also the need for flexibility and responsiveness, I think, in training programs to try and address the skills mismatch that can really affect business potential and growth. Without an equipped and talented workforce, we know that businesses simply can't grow. So, James, from your perspective, what have you seen as a general trend in businesses regarding dealing or addressing the skills gaps that have been emerging?
Yeah, good question. I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that work is absolutely the engine at the center of our economies, and skills are the most important ingredient of that, or the component of that engine. And so work and the skills to fuel it also lie at the heart of the broader sustainable development agenda as well. And as you say, Neil, without the right skills, workers, in particular those from disadvantaged groups, find it more difficult to find the work they need to live well. But at the same time, without a skilled workforces, businesses have no prospect of thriving into the long term either. So business very much aware of the need to take action in this field. Companies that don't take action proactively to develop fit-for-purpose upskilling programs risk having to fall back on unsustainable short-term solutions that ultimately will drive up costs and deliver significantly reduced long-term benefits. And then, as Lee was saying at the beginning as well, their potential to attract new and emerging talent is also significantly reduced. And ultimately, if employers don't have the skill sets if employees don't have the skill sets that are needed to drive business priorities, then the company does not have a particularly rosy long-term future and will not be able to compete in the market. And businesses are very, very aware of this. They're also very aware of the burgeoning skills gap. The labour market's facing mounting problems related to the supply and demand of skills. We're seeing too many people that are finding that they don't have the skills that are needed for the jobs today, let alone the green skills of the jobs tomorrow. And companies are concerned about this and taking action to try and address these with varying degrees of success. It has to be said, there was a PwC survey came out last year and of global chief executive officers, and 72% of CEOs noted that they were worried about the availability of key skills, and 55% saying that they didn't feel they had the right skills on board at the moment to innovate the directions that their strategies were heading in. So business leaders identifying this gap and understanding that they need to do more. But I think a lot of businesses still struggling because this upskilling area is so complex and so dynamic. When you have the triple whammy of new technologies being developed at an unprecedented rate, of also dramatic events playing out across the socio-political landscape, whether it's climate change, COVID-19, shifting demographics, etc. And then the final component of rapidly evolving worker expectations as well. I think the workforce needs are very different now to they were 2 years ago following the pandemic, and people's shift to a more hybrid way of working. So many challenges to overcome when implementing a successful skills program. Businesses have to take all of these into consideration and work with the right partners in order to overcome them, to get the right insights and understanding of the needs of their employees and the evolving skills that will be needed to drive the technologies and innovations of the future. I think fundamentally businesses need to be a little bit more proactive in sending the right skills demands to the marketplace, but also to educational institutions, to apprenticeship schemes and other initiatives like that. I think so far we haven't necessarily been, the private sector hasn't been as good as it could be perhaps at articulating the needs and having that dialogue to really foster understanding of what the emerging skills needs are. And then I think broadly, just to add to that as well, beyond skills slightly, the dynamic of the worker-employee relationship has shifted fundamentally as a result of the pandemic. We're looking at a couple of markets, the US and Europe in particular, where we're seeing a great resignation or a great attrition taking place. In the US, we've seen 19 million workers resign since April, a lot of those without having a different job to go to necessarily. So we're kind of in the same way as I was talking about earlier about this being a reflection point in terms of our building back better. I think a lot of individuals are also a kind of an inflection point in their own careers and really taking stock of how well their employer is meeting their needs, and was at a sort of really unique moment in history with so many people resigning and labor shortages playing out in a range of different geographies. So as well as thinking about the reskilling needs that need to happen, I think businesses also have to understand why many employees are turning away from them at this juncture. And it's, the results I think many companies are finding surprising. It's not necessarily financially related. I think other sort of components are missing from people's lives, from their work environments, people missing the kind of the respect and the relationship aspects that they want to feel in their new contract with their employer. So I think important as well that we take stock of this and understand why the current raft of resignations are happening. And I think that will be key as well into driving a long-term, healthy, happy and engaged workforce that will help the business to prosper into the long term as well.
Indeed. Thank you very much, James. And that's the stat that you quoted, the PwC survey of 72% of CEOs worried about skills development is quite something, quite telling. And moving to Deb from a company perspective, what's Stanley Black & Decker doing to close the skills gap and be prepared for the green transition, given what James has just outlined?
Thanks again for that question, Neil. And I absolutely agree with James when he's quoting those stats from the CEOs, because we can definitely resonate with that. Our CEO feels very similar, probably responded to that survey directly. But for Stanley Black & Decker, we definitely feel that the strategy here has to start with awareness, a much broader understanding out there of the misperceptions of what do we mean when we say trade skills and green skills, and really get into the why. And so this year, for the first time, we invested ourselves and we conducted what we're calling our first Maker Index, which consisted of a survey of high school students, of parents, and trade professionals that are currently out there doing these trade type jobs, and really get into the understanding of why are we not seeing our students, our children pursuing these types of trade skills. So the results of that, I can't share with you right now, but they are set to release on November 1st. So have a good look out for that when it comes out. The second concept I would like to say is we're spending time investing in solving the problem. And if you follow our company, we launched a very ambitious corporate social responsibility program back in 2018, going well beyond what we were achieving incrementally. And we set ourselves in this space a goal to empower 10 million makers by year 2030. And I'm happy to say, as of the end of year 2020, we had empowered or upskilled or reskilled, 1.8 million makers in our world. And we've got obviously 8 million more to go. But we're very happy by the fact that we are addressing the next generational needs to help gain those skills and expertise so that they can thrive in this changing world that we're in. The third highlight, I would say, is to really prove our commitment in our 10 million makers by 2030 goal is that we've launched what we're calling an Empowermaker's Global Impact Challenge. And this is a $25 million US commitment in which our nonprofits, any nonprofits, can apply for grants to fund vocational skills training and reskilling programs in fields like construction and manufacturing. And this is going to cover the next 5 years. So we're really putting our money where our mouth is to open up the aperture and invite everybody to help address this trade skills issue. Further, this month and each month that's called October every year back, we celebrate what we call Maker Month. And it's meant to shine a light on this trade skills gap, answer questions, bring tradespeople together with youth, and really help us to inspire and get excited about joining the trades and hopefully closing the skills gap. And I would be remiss if I didn't reflect on our own Stanley Black & Decker workforce. We're not forgetting about those. They're part of the equation. And we spend quite a bit of time investing in online learning and platforms that help our workforce continually upskill themselves, in this case at their own speed, so that they're constantly professionally moving forward. So we're doing what we can at Stanley Black & Decker. We do feel, like James said as well, it's an ecosystem of stakeholders. We need all companies, communities, nonprofits, government, and the academics out there to help us address this issue. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much, Deb. And that's a great segue into the last bit of our conversation, which is around cooperation and opportunities for cooperation. And however, I'm mindful that we only have 10 minutes left, and we promised our audience that we get into some and A. So what I'm going to do is just on this last question of cooperation, I'd like to move, with apologies to Olga and to Hene, to Liu, to talk about the China perspective. I'm just conscious that WorldSkills will be in China, in Shanghai next year. And I think from a Chinese perspective, if you could give us some perspective on how actors in the TVET system are cooperating for the greening of the economy, that would set us up then, I think, to go into a quick session on Q&A. So Liu, can I pass over to you, please?
Okay, thank you, Neil, for this precious opportunity. I will try to be quick. As a sustainable cooperation, everyone should be better off. Yeah, the firms get more profit, and the government gets higher employment and things like this. So even though I still trust the market is the most important force for the resource allocation, and the situation may be different in different countries, I trust it is the central or the local government who should take the lead in providing incentive-compatible industry policies to instruct the industry to adopt a green transition, like tax refunding and things like this. And they should also provide public services like the research on the future skills, platforms for the best practice sharing, just like what we are doing at the moment, and also what the WorldSkills competition is doing. And as for the training institutions, technically, there has been already intensive researches made in providing framework for them to greening the institutions, among which the proposal of UNESCO is very impressive to me, and it's very comprehensive and easy to adapt. So my understanding is that for them, what they really need is not methodology or tools, but determinations. So on the one hand, we need the government support to pull them into the track, and on the other hand, we need the market competition to push them into the track. As for the industries or the companies, I should say that they should focus intensively in finding out the profitable green industries, green business, and then they can provide more green jobs with very high salary and pass the information to the institutions and also to the employees that the green industry is very promising. So we have already mentioned a lot about the social responsibilities. I think it's great, but it should never be overemphasized. Yeah, thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much. I'm just moving quickly to Lee. Lee's got a question for us to kick off. We've only got a couple of minutes, so Lee, why don't you ask your question, which is on the theme of, I think, collaborative opportunities.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks to all the panelists for sharing these incredible insights. So my question as one of skilled workers is, from the perspective of governments and companies, what efforts can be expected from skilled workers? What is their role in closing the green skills mismatch?
Okay, thank you. So maybe Deb, from a business perspective, from a company perspective, you could take that in terms of what efforts can be expected from skills workers.
I think to really inspire and bring forward more skilled workers requires our existing population of individuals in those types of trade skills to invest their time, to volunteer their time, to connect with our youth. And as I mentioned before, blow up these misconceptions out there about what value there is in a trade skills and put the reality in their hands, that it is a high-paying profession, that it is something to be proud of. And it's good to work with your hands, not only your mind, and really inspire our youth there. So I would definitely encourage individuals in those skills to reach out and inspire the next generation to come forward.
Fantastic, and absolutely spot on in terms of working to inspire more people to take up trades and to go into skills professions, and that's what we at WorldSkills are all about. I have another question, which is from Elena Doskanova, which is, which professionals in the sphere of sustainable development and green skills are in demand? So which professions in the sphere of sustainable development and green skills are in demand? I wonder, James, whether you have any perspective on what your members are seeing in terms of demand for green skills.
Yeah, well, I think it's an evolving area for our members as well. I think as the various technologies evolve, as innovations emerge as well, this is a very dynamic field. So I think there's a specific set of green skills that are needed right now, but I think that will change very much 6 months, 12 months down the line too. So I think the critical thing is having that infrastructure in place, that dialogue in place between business and the broader ecosystem to translate those emerging needs and demands quickly into their implications for the education sector or the government sector or other public sector bodies. So I think that's the critical thing that we're trying to advance with our members to keep things evolving.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you all very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw to a close this fantastic discussion. It's been full of insights, I think, hearing from global partners and thinking about the global perspective on this massive challenge that we're all facing, but also from the perspective of the private sector too, and thinking about how they're engaging and responding to the challenges, and particularly interesting as well, just to get a China perspective and thinking about what's going on in one of the world's major economies and how that is driving change, not just within China but around the world as well, I think. So all I'd like to do now is, just in wrapping up the session, is to thank all of our speakers for being able to join us in launching this session of the Green Skills track. So thank you to Olga, to Hene, James, Deb and Leo for your contributions this morning. Really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank and make a special mention to all WorldSkills Conference Coalition partners for their support, who are making this possible. And of course, I would like to ask you all to join us for the rest of the sessions in the Skills for Green Jobs track, and that will be taking place tomorrow. Registration is required for all sessions, and you can do that via the WorldSkills Conference website. And you can also attend sessions from the other tracks from today until Thursday. And then at the end of the week on Friday, we have our closing plenary, where we will be revealing the conclusions of the conference from all the tracks. And we'll also be getting a sneak preview at the WorldSkills Museum, which is going to be launched in Shanghai next year. And that's the world's first museum dedicated to vocational skills and training. And we'll also, on Friday, be setting the ground for the WorldSkills Conference in 2022, when WorldSkills will be hosted in Shanghai. Now, we will be uploading documents onto the website so that you can read some of the reports that we've mentioned here today. And so please do check out the website for more information and to get some access to the information that some of our speakers had spoken about. So please do check that out. But for now, thank you all very much for your participation, and I hope you have a good day and good evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
very much. Bye.
Well done, Neil and panelists.
Thank you all.
Very good
I
topic.
think we still have an audience.
Yeah, it seemed to go well.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody.
Really good.